First off, we have Xana Kernodle. Xana, absolutely lovely. She was 21 years of age, and she hailed from Arizona. Personality has been described as joyful, bubbly, got along with everybody, and was a pure joy to be around. And then, along with Xana, we have Ethan. Ethan Chapin was a triplet, and was majoring in sports management at the University of Idaho. And he was in this loving relationship with Xana. He was not domiciled, he didn't live at her address there on King Road, but he was there that night. They had actually been to a fraternity party earlier that evening and had made it back home, made it back to Xana's home. And so, in addition to that, we have Madison Mogen. We've heard a lot about all of these victims. We know that Maddie, along with Kaylee, were intertwined in a way that many of us can understand. They've been childhood friends since they were wee little things, had grown up together, had shared, their journey, into academia, and they were sharing a space together in this environment because prior to this, Kaylee, she was done with her college career at this point in time. She was moving on, and she had come back to visit. Her bedroom was actually empty at that point, and it was the largest bedroom up on the third floor of this structure. So you've got these people that are all indwelling this residence together that night, and they're full of life, they're full of hope, they're full of promise of what the future held, and that joy that only comes about when you are part of a college community. And you're not expecting there to be a monster roaming around a campus. You're not expecting that. You can't conceive it. As evil as the world is, as horrible as the things are that we see and that we talk about in the media, and that certainly I've seen over the course of my career, again, I emphasize that the university environment is very cloistered to a great degree. And one other thing I have to say in addition to this is a location of, I'm not speaking poorly of them, it's just the reality. The university itself is in a rural location, and that's fantastic because I come from a university that's also in a rural location. It's an area of isolation. So you have this kind of outer bubble that exists in this world that gives you even more sense of safety. And so I began to kind of think about my students. I began to think about these victims and the world that they inhabited. And I could see, the next week when I went into class, all of my kids were talking about this. And it wasn't just because I was teaching forensics and they wanted to try to understand maybe what had happened. That wasn't the case. They were fearful. And I think that fear spread all over the country at that point in time. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. This is what we do know about kind of the placement of everybody during that night. As I had mentioned, Xana and Ethan had attended a party at the Sigma Chi house. And what did I say about Fraternity Row? What did I say? Anybody remember? It's almost within view, right? So I've had several friends in the media that were there, and it's an easy walk. It's literally right down the road. You can access it, essentially through a group of trees down at the end of the street, and you're right in the middle of the row. So they had made it home after attending this party. They were there roughly by 1:45 a.m., okay? Now, there are any number of spottings along the way of both Kaylee and Maddie, and they're seen at various locations. Remember also, does anybody know what they shared in common relative to an occupation? What did they do? Anybody know? Mad Greek, right? They worked at the restaurant together. So you're thinking about all of these circumstances surrounding these two environments in which these two pair of people, actually worked in. You're thinking, well, as an investigator, Did they have contact with anybody at the restaurant? Was there maybe perhaps a problem that was going on at the Sigma Chi house? That had kind of arisen, during the entire process of trying to understand the timeline, because the timeline is monumentally confusing along the way. But we do know that by 1:45, both Kaylee and Maddie had made it back home, and that's important in the sense that you're getting settled down for the night. Now, one thing that was made, a lot of hay was made over the course of the period of time when Maddie and Kaylee were out. They were spotted. We know that they were spotted at a bar, and we know that they were spotted at a food truck. And I think that when investigators retrospectively looked back at this, one of the primary people they were thinking about at the time may have had specific knowledge or may have had something to do with the crime itself, was possibly this kind of unidentified, kind of murky person that had dropped them off back at the King Road address. Does everybody recall that? And suddenly, just in a matter of a few days, they kind of eliminated that individual, thinking that, yeah, I don't think that that's what happened. They were able to investigate that individual, talk to them, and kind of exclude them from this group of people. So at that point in time, we have this odd-shaped house that they're all indwelling in. And I've talked to a couple of people. This is something that you see within the context of a college town, where you have these structures that are indwelling. They've been added onto over a period of time. The dynamics, the floor plan, all that stuff. And we're going to take a virtual tour of that scene in just a moment. You go through this environment and you begin to think, this is so complex, and the structure itself is so odd when you look at it, because you've got this base level where individuals might enter into, if they have parked their vehicle down there, there's actually a keypadded door. I'll show you in just a second. And then you have this other area up above the house is kind of built into the side of a bank, and then you've got these sliders or sliding glass doors that people can make entry to at that point in time. And so you're thinking, well, in this environment, how would someone know to kind of navigate the complexity of this place? Because it is odd. You've got this area that faces King Road where people could actually walk up. And, one of the things that was kind of put out over this period of time was that this door, the keypad on the door, everyone knew the key to this and knew the key code to the door, and that it was easily accessed. And also, we also have heard over and over and over again that the sliders were not always secured. So you're thinking, well, how could someone get into the structure without being detected? Well, if the doors are never locked, or if the key code is general knowledge, it'd be very easy, and no one is going to be any of the wiser, are they? And, the other thing that has kind of bounced around, certainly through the media over this period of time, they have continually used the term party house. This was a location where multiple people would gather, and they could show up at any point in time. You might have strangers in this environment. They would host parties, these sorts of things, and it was kind of a gathering spot. There may have been some calls that had, noise calls that may have come over a period of time. I don't think that there were any major incidences necessarily that, thought that something nefarious was necessarily going on there. But we do know this. It's a college town. These are college kids. They're going to have friends over. They're going to drink. They're going to laugh. They're going to party. They're going to do all the stuff that all of these college students always do all across the nation. So the fact that you might have a stranger that could interject himself into this environment without being noticed, or without being seen perhaps, or recognized, that's certainly a possibility. And I think that the investigators had thought about that as well. Just so that we know, there are 3 levels within this structure. And in the bottom level, there are 2 bedrooms. Only one of these bedrooms was occupied at this particular time when these homicides took place. And you have one subject downstairs, that's Miss Funk, that resided downstairs. Now, we know that she was at home at the time that these homicides took place. That has been verified. So when you enter into this dwelling from this parking pad, that again, you don't know whether or not that door is regularly secured or who might have had the code to it. You can enter into this area and proceed up the interior staircase that leads to the second floor. And it's when you begin to look at the house, the staircases are on separate landings, so they will be offset from one another. When you enter into the second floor of this dwelling, we have exactly 2 people that live on this floor. Now, in addition to this area that the individuals on the second floor would be living in, we also have a great room, which is where these parties would be hosted perhaps, television, couches, kind of set up within this environment. And it's an area where people would gather. But the key here is the fact that immediately adjacent to this is where you can access the back of the house, where this leads off of the landing. There's actually a deck that's back there. You can proceed forward off the deck. You can actually exit out of that door and wind up in this kind of open area that goes away from the home. And what's really key here is that on the backside of this yard, there's a large hedgerow with trees, this sort of thing, and it provides cover. One of the most interesting images that kind of came up during the period of time when they were looking at this case immediately after, we had who I believe were probably FBI crime scene investigators that were back into the wood line, and they were there, and they caught a great image of them kind of hunched over in the wood line, and they're looking out and looking at the house. Well, why would they do this? What was the purpose of them looking at the house from that point in time? Well, here's the reality. When you're in cover like this and you can observe that home, you can see everything from that hedgerow without being seen. You have cover there, and also off in the distance, you can see the lights. So that night, as lights went off, one by one by one, you could tell where everybody was beginning to settle down in that house, perhaps for the night. They were going to sleep at that point in time. This is what I do know. When you have this multi-storied environment in which these kids are all indwelling, and the fact that it is laid out in such a odd configuration where you can enter on 2 separate floors, the staircases essentially turned back and forth against another. It's an odd layout. So what does that tell us about an individual that may have, in fact, entered into this residence? Anybody want to take a guess? It's not, I mean, if any of us, just put yourself in this position. If any of us in this audience had never seen that home before, would you precisely know where to go if you were looking for someone? I wouldn't. It's one of the most confusing structures that I've come across in a couple of years relative to a standalone dwelling where you have had a multiple homicide committed. So when you make your way into the scene, it's so very highly complex that it would seem to me reasonable as an investigator that an individual that would purpose to commit this kind of carnage in this environment, specifically targeting any individual that is in there, would have to have a familiarity with this environment. Would you agree with that? And so as an individual might be making their way through, you have to try to understand, do they understand where the targets are in this environment? Now, we have been told on a number of occasions that the 2 young ladies that were on the 3rd floor one of the 2 may very well have been a target, okay? So how do you know where they reside, lay their heads within this environment, because it's not on the bottom floor, it's not even on the middle floor, it's on the 3rd floor. That means you would have to, if you entered through the parking pad area, you'd have to go up 3 flights of stairs. If you enter through the sliders, you're going through 2 flights of stairs. You make your way up, and if they are in fact a target, you have to know that one of the individuals is no longer in that bedroom. Did they go to that empty bedroom first, open the door, see that it was empty, turn and go to the room where both Kaylee and Maddie were sleeping in the same bed? You begin to have this bubble up in your mind, and you think about how dark this is. You begin to think about that this was highly planned, perhaps. And then you have to be prepared when you enter into this environment to do your worst.